Maggie May obviously turned my whole life around. It was about my first sexual encounter, which lasted about 3 seconds.
Rod Stewart has sold over 200 million albums worldwide and captivated audiences with his distinctive raspy voice on hits like Sailing, Maggie May, and Do You Think I'm Sexy? Now at age 80, he has finally revealed the 6 artists who had the deepest impact on his musical journey. These influences didn't just shape his voice, they completely transformed his approach to music, often in surprising ways that differ greatly from his own style. The Beatles, the foundation of everything. At the top of Rod Stewart's list are the Beatles, the 4 musicians from Liverpool who changed the world of music forever. Rod's admiration for them goes beyond their talent. It represents a musical awakening that happened early in his career. In the early 1960s, when Rod was still a young man playing harmonica in London bars and dreaming of fronting a real blues band, the Beatles were just beginning their own journey to stardom. Rod first encountered the Beatles at the famous Cavern Club, and the experience left a lasting impression on him. He later recalled how you could just look into their eyes and know they were destined to make history. The entire room felt electrified, not just because of their music, but because of their commanding presence. As the Beatles exploded into a global phenomenon, Rod was still far from fame, but he quietly followed their rise as a student rather than a competitor. This might seem unusual given that Rod's early music leaned more toward rock and roll, soul, and blues rather than the melodic pop that the Beatles were known for. However, for Rod, the Beatles represented something much deeper than just another band. They were trailblazers who proved that a group could capture the soul of an entire era while remaining authentically themselves. Rod has consistently praised both Paul McCartney and John Lennon throughout his career. He has called McCartney probably the greatest melody writer of all time, while describing Lennon as having a rawness and sincerity in his lyrics that no one could imitate. This wasn't just casual praise. It was Rod's acknowledgement that despite his own success and worldwide fame, the Beatles had achieved an emotional depth that remained unmatched. Rod's respect for the Beatles is evident in his choice to cover their songs throughout his career. His version of In My Life has left audiences moved, not because of technical skill alone, but because it felt like an honest reflection of everything he had experienced, lost, and loved. This contrasts sharply with his opinion of groups like the Monkees, whom he viewed as entertainment rather than true artists. While he found the Monkees fun, he compared them to fizzy soda, colorful and entertaining but lacking the lasting impact of fine wine. The Beatles' influence on Rod goes beyond just musical inspiration. Their approach to songwriting, which prioritized emotion over rhythm, deeply affected his own creative process. Songs like Sailing, Tonight's the Night, and You're in My Heart all reflect this emphasis on emotional content that he learned from studying the Beatles' work. When Rod began writing from the heart instead of focusing purely on musical technique, that's when he truly became a great artist. Even now at 80, Rod admits that the Beatles remain the music he turns to every night for comfort. He has said that when he feels himself getting old, he puts on Let It Be and becomes that 17-year-old boy at the Cavern Club again. This shows how the Beatles continue to provide not just musical inspiration, but emotional grounding throughout his life. Bob Dylan, the prophet of song. Bob Dylan ranks second on Rod Stewart's list of most beloved artists, which might surprise many people. On the surface, there seems to be little connection between Rod's glamorous stage presence and Dylan's mysterious, reclusive nature. However, when you look deeper into Rod's music and listen to his rare confessions about his craft, it becomes clear that Dylan served not just as inspiration, but as an invisible mentor throughout his 6-decade career. Rod's love for Dylan began with a chance encounter on the radio in the early 1960s. He was still an unknown young man traveling around London on buses, trying to break into the music scene with his distinctive bluesy voice, when he first heard Blowin' in the Wind on FM radio. The experience left him frozen, not because of the melody, but because of the lyrics. Rod had never heard anyone sing like that. Dylan wasn't performing, he was prophesying. From that moment on, Dylan became a name that Rod Stewart couldn't let go of. While many singers of that era tried to imitate the looks, style, or vocal techniques of popular stars, Rod chose to learn something much more difficult from Dylan: how to write meaningful songs. Dylan changed everything by proving that lyrics could be poetry, and Rod has covered more Dylan songs than perhaps any other artist throughout his career, with both his solo work and with the Faces. The most significant example of Dylan's influence can be found in Rod's famous song Forever Young, which he wrote in 1988 as a tribute to youth, hope, and fatherly love. Rod has openly admitted that his version of Forever Young is a tribute to Dylan, who inspired him to write music in his own way. What makes this even more remarkable is that Dylan, despite being famously protective of his work, didn't object when Rod's version was released, even though the melody and title were nearly identical to Dylan's original. Instead, both parties agreed to share the rights, a rare gesture that perhaps represented Dylan's way of saying he understood and respected Rod's tribute. The relationship between Rod and Dylan represents an interesting contrast between two very different personalities. Rod has always been loud and flamboyant, wearing fur coats and high heels while singing about wild nights. Dylan, on the other hand, quietly set the world's mind on fire with just a guitar and 3 chords. This difference, rather than creating distance, became something irresistibly attractive to Rod. He has said that Dylan has a stillness that he will never possess, but that doesn't diminish his admiration. Dylan's influence extends beyond just songwriting techniques. He shaped the way Rod Stewart approaches time itself and confronts genuine emotion in his music. Heavy ballads like I Don't Want to Talk About It and The Killing of Georgie carry Dylan's influence in their storytelling approach. They don't need dramatic arrangements, but always carry deep meaning. Now at 80, Rod no longer turns to the energetic hits of his youth for inspiration. Instead, he still speaks of Dylan as if referring to an old friend he never needed to meet. When asked recently if there was any artist who still made him pause in silence, Rod didn't hesitate to name Bob Dylan. He has said that every time he hears Dylan's Not Dark Yet, it feels like reading a farewell poem, and he's not ready to say goodbye. This represents a wordless understanding between two men who once lived music to the fullest, but who now approach their final chapters with clarity and gratitude. Mick Jagger, the master of stage presence. Mick Jagger occupies the 3rd position on Rod Stewart's list, and this choice probably surprises no one who has watched Rod perform. In reality, Rod Stewart built almost his entire stage persona from what he observed in Jagger during the early 1960s. Rod has candidly admitted that Mick wrote the rulebook for what it means to front a band, and that he copied every move Jagger made, just like everyone else did. If you've ever seen Rod Stewart perform on stage, lifting the microphone stand like a spear, gliding with a mischievous look, his shirt flowing in the wind as if he were the center of the universe, you're witnessing techniques he learned directly from Mick Jagger. A comparison between Rod's performance style and Rolling Stones videos from 1965 to 1972 reveals the clear connection. That style of being simultaneously free yet controlled, the way Jagger's body seemed to consume the entire stage, was something Rod borrowed almost completely. What's remarkable is that Rod never tried to hide this influence. His admiration for Mick didn't begin with a personal friendship, but developed from careful observation. While Rod was still struggling to find his place with the Jeff Beck Group, the Rolling Stones had already become the rebellious icons of Britain. Rod has recalled standing in the wings during concerts, watching Mick's every move to learn how to command an audience. He realized that Mick wasn't just a singer, he was a weapon on stage, and Rod positioned himself as the student. Among many of his contemporaries, including Eric Burdon, Roger Daltrey, and even Paul McCartney, Rod always placed Jagger in a league of his own. This wasn't just because of the music, but because of the complete lifestyle approach. Mick Jagger was the first performer to turn vocals into a truly physical experience. He didn't just sing, he delivered every line with his hands, his hips, his eyes. This was something Rod had never witnessed before, and it taught him how to express himself with his whole being and make the stage a part of himself. Mick Jagger, despite rarely expressing emotion or praising others publicly, has acknowledged Odd with genuine respect. In a 1997 interview, Mick said that Rod always knew how to heat up the stage and possessed an instinct that not everyone has. He added that he didn't mind people saying Rod was influenced by him, as long as Rod did it well, and he really did do it well. This represented significant acknowledgement from someone known for being cold and reserved. There have also been moments of playful competition between them. Rod once joked that if there was anyone in the world he'd want to learn how to age stylishly from, it would be Mick Jagger. He quipped that Mick was the only guy he knew who could wear tight pants at 70 and still not get laughed at. Behind the joke lies deep admiration for Jagger's longevity, his image control, and his ability to survive in an industry that can be cruel to aging performers. Mick Jagger's influence can be seen not only in how Rod Stewart sings, but also in how he organizes tours, interacts with audiences, and even chooses his outfits. People have sometimes called Rod the Mick Jagger of the middle class, because if Jagger was the icon of rebellion, Rod was more relatable and tender, but still maintained that cheeky and sexy appeal. Now at 80, Rod still maintains elements of that bad boy image, though the mischievous glare has been replaced by a warmer smile, and the provocative gestures have become gentler signature moves. When asked recently whether he still felt influenced by anyone in his 80s, Rod laughed and said he was still trying to catch up with Mick, noting that Jagger just doesn't seem to age. The relationship between Rod and Mick today needs no formal definition. They're not as close as brothers, but not as distant as strangers, just two men who once shared the enormous stage of rock and roll. They understand that they've influenced each other and respect that in their own way, without needing thank yous or dramatic gestures, just occasional light-hearted jokes in interviews. Chuck Berry and Little Richard, the roots of rock. In fourth place on Rod Stewart's list are not one but two names, Chuck Berry and Little Richard. These two legends laid the foundation for modern rock music and represent Rod's earliest musical awakening. If the Beatles inspired Rod to write songs, Bob Dylan taught him about emotion, and Mick Jagger became his performance model, then Chuck Berry and Little Richard were the primal roots, the first thunderclap that awakened the musical dreams of a boy from North London. Picture Rod Stewart at age 13, with hair not yet styled, shirt still neatly pressed, having his mind completely blown the first time he heard Johnny B. Good on his home radio. He later recalled never having heard anyone play guitar like Chuck Berry, declaring that Chuck Berry was rock and roll itself, and without him, there wouldn't be any of the music that followed. This wasn't just flattery. It was a declaration from someone who has lived in music for over 6 decades. What captivated Rod about Chuck Berry wasn't just the incredible guitar playing, but the combination of rhythm, storytelling, and personality. Chuck didn't just sing, he told stories. The lyrics about a little boy named Johnny who carried his guitar in a sack, dreaming of playing on a big stage one day, resonated deeply with Rod. Anyone could hear those lyrics and see themselves reflected in them. Rod, back when he was still an anonymous fan, already saw his own dreams and aspirations in every Chuck Berry lyric and guitar riff. If Chuck Berry represented storytelling through guitar strings, then Little Richard was pure, uncontrollable explosion. For Richard, music wasn't just sound. It was fire that ignited faster than any careful arrangement could contain. Rod has described Little Richard as absolutely insane, noting that he taught an entire generation how to have fun on stage. Richard didn't care what people thought. He was completely himself, 100% of the time. Rod didn't just learn stage presence from Mick Jagger. Long before that influence, it was Little Richard who taught him that a singer had to make the stage explode like a party. The bulging eyes, the explosive screams, the impossible jumps. These were all forms of liberation that Rod absorbed like bubbles soaking into strong liquor. When you see Rod Stewart throw the microphone into the air or kick his leg up like a dancer, you're witnessing Richard's influence, not Rod's original innovation. During a 1972 performance, Rod covered Little Richard's Lucille with the Faces, and Richard himself heard the recording. In a rare 1985 interview, Little Richard said that Rod had that wildness and possessed what he called a scream with soul. This was one of the few times Richard publicly praised a white singer, and it meant a great deal to Rod, even though he never claimed to be Richard's successor. He simply felt gratitude. Without Chuck Berry and Little Richard, there would have been no Hot Legs, no Do You Think I'm Sexy, no wild live shows with the Faces, and no spinning dance moves that made audiences scream. Their influence might not be as obviously stated as when Rod discusses Dylan or Jagger, but it's present in every energetic note, in every leap, and in the way Rod always made music feel less like a formal ritual and more like a never-ending joyride. Even now at 80, when Rod wants to feel that youthful spark again, he doesn't turn to ballads or jazz, but to Roll Over Beethoven and Tutti Frutti, the wild, energetic songs from an era before digital music, but with recordings that changed the color of the world forever. He has said that despite being old now, every time he hears Long Tall Sally, he's back in his living room in 1958, dancing wildly on his mother's carpet. Both Chuck Berry and Little Richard have passed away, leaving behind a legacy that no one can replace. However, in Rod Stewart's heart and in the hearts of millions of other artists, they continue to live on, not as distant painted legends, but as the very first heartbeats of rock and roll, even before the genre had an official name: Sam Cooke, the voice of soul. Sam Cooke holds the 5th position on Rod Stewart's list of greatest influences. To Rod, Sam Cooke wasn't just an icon. He was a hero, the first person who made him realize that a single line of song could contain an entire life's worth of emotion. Rod has openly admitted that he didn't just learn from Sam Cooke. He wanted to be him. Going back to the 1960s, in a rainy London alleyway, Rod Stewart was a 19-year-old trying to sing with a group of friends when he first heard Cupid on the radio. In that moment, time seemed to stop. He had never heard a voice like Sam Cooke's. It wasn't just beautiful. It had genuine soul and raw emotion. There was a tender kind of pain that Rod had never experienced in any rock and roll record before. From that moment on, Rod Stewart began a journey to find his own soul, and he has admitted that Sam Cooke served as his guide throughout this process. He didn't try to directly imitate Sam's style, but studied carefully how Sam controlled emotion through every word and every pause. When Rod first heard A Change Is Gonna Come, he was completely overwhelmed. He knew he had to learn to sing like that, to sing from a place deep within the soul. It's no coincidence that Rod Stewart's 1974 cover of You Send Me was what he called a musical prayer to Sam Cooke. Throughout his decades-long career, Rod moved across many different genres, from rock to disco, from ballads to pop. But somewhere in every melody, there was always a trace of Cooke's influence, a particular breath, a soft, vocal bend, a deep sustained note that carried emotional weight. In 2009, Rod released an album called Soul Book, filled entirely with classic soul covers, nearly half of them by Sam Cooke, or directly inspired by his work. When asked why he chose to create this tribute in his 60s, Rod simply smiled and explained that he had been trying to reach Sam's level of soul since he was a boy, and it was finally time to say thank you. There were no dramatics or self-promotion involved, just a simple expression of gratitude from one artist to another who had shown him that music isn't just something to hear, but something to truly feel. Sam Cooke passed away in 1964, when Rod was still just an emerging name in music. They never met in person. There are no photographs of them together. No emails or letters were exchanged, and no direct words of gratitude were ever spoken between them. However, if music truly is a language that transcends time, then perhaps Sam somehow knew about Rod's admiration and respect. In 1982, Lou Rawls, who was Sam Cooke's close friend and collaborator, once said that Sam paid close attention to soulful male voices, and he believed that if Sam were still alive, he would have liked Rod Stewart because the kid sings like he's confessing something. This observation perfectly captures the quality that connects Rod's singing style to Sam Cooke's legacy. In many of Rod's most famous songs, including I Don't Want to Talk About It and Reason to Believe, you can hear that distinctive Cooke quality in the pauses and phrasing. Rod sings like a man who doesn't hide his feelings but never overdoes them either. He knows he isn't Sam Cooke, but he allows a part of Cooke's spirit to live on in the way he approaches a song. Now at 80, Rod Stewart has moved beyond the wild energy and flashy stage presence of his younger years, but the element that lasts the longest is likely the way he sings. During a 2024 television appearance, Rod performed Bring It On Home to Me in a special interview. When asked why he chose that particular song, he quietly replied, "Because I still miss Sam, and I don't think I'll ever stop." The relationship between these two artists, one who has passed and one who continues to perform, represents a quiet but profound kind of affection that needs no meetings or acknowledgments. Just one song sung from the heart is enough to honor that connection. Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, the Chicago Blues Masters. In the final position on Rod Stewart's list are two towering figures from Chicago blues, Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. To Rod, these men weren't just artists, they were teachers who showed an entire generation of British musicians how to sing through pain and express genuine emotion through music. Like many young British artists in the 1960s, including Mick Jagger, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, and Keith Richards, Rod Stewart didn't begin his musical career with chart-topping hits. Instead, he spent sleepless nights with his ear pressed to an old radio, listening to every mournful lyric that echoed across the Atlantic Ocean from Chicago. But no voices haunted and inspired him more than the raspy howl of Howlin' Wolf and the muddy guitar combined with groaning laments of Muddy Waters. Rod has acknowledged that Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf were the ones who taught British musicians how to sing with real grit and authenticity. Without them, he would never have learned how to sing like he meant every single word. That famous rasp and sharp, gravelly voice that Rod Stewart is known for around the world wasn't actually the result of cigarettes, whiskey, or street attitude, as many people believe. He learned it directly from studying Muddy Waters. In his memoir, Rod recounted staying up all night just to listen to Hoochie Coochie Man on repeat, trying to imitate every vocal tremor and growl. He practiced Muddy's voice until his throat was raw because he didn't want to sing pretty. He wanted to sing real, with authentic emotion and genuine feeling. Howlin' Wolf taught Rod a different but equally important lesson. Wolf's approach wasn't about technical perfection, but pure emotional expression. Wolf didn't need to hit all the right notes or croon sweetly. He roared like thunder, cried from his throat, and laughed with bitterness when the song called for it. Howlin' Wolf was the first artist who made Rod understand that music doesn't have to be smooth or polished. It just has to be real and honest. When Wolf sang, he didn't apologize for anything, and Rod learned that fearless approach to emotional expression. Rod's love for American blues wasn't just a passing phase in his development. It was something that seeped into his bones and shaped the entire early chapter of his career. Before becoming a famous solo singer, Rod worked as a harmonica player and backup vocalist for Long John Baldry's British blues band, which was known for covering songs by Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. Rod never tried to hide this apprenticeship. In fact, he was proud to be called a mixed-blood child of Chicago blues and London street soul. Interestingly, both Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf were aware of Rod Stewart's work, and they never viewed his interpretation of blues as inappropriate cultural borrowing, as some critics today might suggest. In a 1978 interview at the Montreux Jazz Festival, when asked about British singers performing American blues, Muddy Waters simply smiled and said that if they sing from the heart, it's not imitation. He specifically mentioned that boy Rod sings from the heart, which represented real respect from a master of the genre.